guys, welcome back to IPV and me. Hope you're all doing amazing. It is a very, very, very hot, humid, sweaty, gross, rainy day in New York as I record this. It's been hot. I think the whole entire world is just like hot right now, honestly, and not in a good way. But yeah, it's been a little much this summer. It's only like the first week of July and it's already like baking hot. We've just come off of a very intense heat wave in New York about 2 weeks ago, which was crazy. I had a headache for like 5 days straight. It was horrendous. All of my sinusitis suffers. That was kind of hard to say. I feel for you in this heat because, you know, the heat just like makes it so much worse. I highly recommend an ice roller. It's the best thing that I've ever purchased just for sinus pain in general, but also now that it's really hot, honestly, it's been amazing. I just come home and like just start rolling my face. It's amazing. But yeah, other than that, I've been busy as usual. I just had my mom and sister here for a visit. My sister was here for kind of like 3 weeks off and on. She came here, I've mentioned before, she lives in Australia. She was here for a week, went to Ireland, and then when she came back, she brought my mom with her. So my mom was here for a week. My mom has not been here for 8 years, so that was really fun having her here. Unfortunately, the weather wasn't great. It rained a lot, but we still had a lot of fun. And my sister hadn't been here actually since she moved to Australia, which was 3.5 years ago, I guess. So it was a lot of fun. Got to introduce them to like all my friends and brought them to my job. They met my co-workers and yeah, we had a lot of fun. So that was going on amongst various other things. Work is really busy right now. So yeah, it's just been go. And it's always very hard when it's hot outside to do things, but I've been trying to just get outside and do some more things, you know how it is. The last time we spoke, I covered the Cassie Ventura evidence at the Diddy trial. Unfortunately, we had the verdict a few days ago, sometime this week, and it wasn't great, but you know, these things can be expected, and I still think it's amazing that Cassie was brave enough to go and testify amongst all the other women and men too who testified at the trial and told their own traumatic stories. I was going to cover more of the trial. I know the last time we spoke, I had said I wasn't sure if I was going to continue on with it or just focus on Cassie's story, particularly because there's a lot of domestic violence in it. So I decided to stick with that just for that one episode. But I'm sure you guys have already been keeping up with the news anyways. So I'm going to make this intro really short because we have a lot to get to. It is a very long story today. I'm trying not to split it into 2 episodes. As I'm recording this, I still don't know if I'm going to make it 2 episodes. So you'll know before me at this point. So let's get into it. So today I'm going to tell the story of the murder of Sophie Toscan du Plantier. It is one of the most well-known and frustrating cases in the history of Ireland. This was a hard case to decide to do as there's so much rumour and controversy surrounding the story. I got the majority of this information from the book Sophie, the Final Verdict by Senan Maloney, who was a journalist who was there from the beginning of the investigation. He was actually the very first journalist to show up on the scene. Out of everything I have read, watched, and like I've been hardcore like sucking up information of this case since it first happened in the 90s. This one seemed to include a broad range of the facts, and it is a very hard case, like I said, to research, because there was just so much information, so many like crazy wild rumors, conspiracies. Also myself, obviously being from Ireland and remembering when the murder happened, even though I was very young, I have heard so many things over the years, formed my own opinions, sometimes based on things which have turned out to be untrue, or, you know, explained away. Or so I took out Senan Maloney's own opinions of the case on Ian Bailey. I've just stuck to the facts that we know are true, and I, you know, checked and researched myself, and then I also added in things that I know to be true from like other sources to documentaries. Some are just things that I already knew and just kind of added a little bit onto. I wanted to do this particular case ultimately because while there isn't domestic violence per se involving the main character, there is confirmed domestic violence throughout the story, which I believe is an important factor. And, you know, I try to cover all kinds of cases of abuse. This is also why I kind of have this like kind of side episode series in the podcast, because I want to cover more so like violence against women in general, and not always necessarily have it be just in a domestic situation. But then to kind of also separate it, because if some people are here and they just want to hear those domestic abuse stories specifically, then, you know, you can kind of like weed out the ones that you don't really want to listen to. So anyways, just to let you know that beforehand, I do mention a lot of the weird rumors and conspiracies throughout, but everything that is in here, it's all factual. And that is important to know. So with that, let's get on with the story of Sophie Toscan du Plantier. On December 23rd, 1996, Irish news broadcaster RTE reported a shocking and unusual event for the country. In a remote area in County Cork, Toormore, 6 miles outside the town of Schull on the Mizen Peninsula, the body of a foreign woman was found. It was unknown at the time, but the victim was a 39-year-old French woman called Sophie Toscan du Plantier, who had been brutally murdered sometime during the night of December 22nd or the early hours of the 23rd. The cause of death? Multiple violent blows to the head. Sophie was born on the 28th of July 1957 in Paris to George, a dentist, and Marguerite, a deputy mayor. She had a brother, Bertrand, and a sister, Stephanie. She went to Ireland one summer when she was 14 to improve her English, where she fell in love with the Irish countryside. She studied law, married at 22, and had a baby boy called Pierre-Louis, born in March 1981. They later divorced. She met and married Daniel Toscan du Plantier, a renowned film producer, in 1991. They had a loving relationship, calling each other constantly, with Daniel often buying Sophie gifts and flowers. Sophie was travelling alone from Paris to Cork. Verna Hyde, a car rental agent at the airport, gave her the keys to a brand new silver Ford Fiesta, which was due back on St. Stephen's Day, December 26th at 9:15am. So St. Stephen's Day is a widely observed holiday in Ireland. It occurs the day after Christmas Day. So Verna recalled Sophie being polite but somewhat distracted, and that she seemed to know her way around the airport, needing no help to find the car park. On her way to Toormore, Sophie stopped at Carmier's shop in Ballydahab to buy firewood. By the time Sophie reached her home in Dunmanus West, it was already dark. Her house was a 2-storey cottage sitting on 10 acres of land, which had been bought by her husband Daniel in 1992, although he put the deed in Sophie's name. A portion of the land was being leased to a local farmer, Finbar Helen, for grazing cattle. A 6-bar gate sat about 70 metres from the house. Behind the house was a storehouse and another gate where sat the house of Alfie Lyons and his partner, Shirley Foster. There had been a dispute about the ownership of the storehouse, but there were no ongoing issues. Previously, Alfie, who was 66, had broken into Sophie's house while she was back in France, but only to use the bath as he had no running water at his own house, and no charges were pressed. Further away was the home of an English couple, the Richardsons, who were rarely there. Sophie's cottage was humble, and she had hired the wife of Finbar, Josie Helen, to maintain it while she was away. So Sophie got to the house just after 4:30 p.m. and called Josie to thank her for having the house together, telling her she was there to rest and organise her work. She called her friend Agnes in France and told her she was happy to be in Ireland. 4 kilometres east of Sophie's house, in Liscaha, in a house she called the Prairie, lived a Welsh artist called Jules Thomas and her partner Ian Bailey. Bailey, a freelance journalist and poet, was British and had moved to Ireland back in 1991. He rented a building he called the Studio from Jules' mother Beryl, which is about 200 metres from the Prairie. Also in the house were Jules' daughters. Safi was 22, Ginny was 19, and their half-sister Fenella was 14. They did not like Bailey, feeling he was disruptive and had invaded their home. Bailey was home all day on the Friday Sophie travelled to Cork until around 10 p.m. when he and Jules drove to Skull to the Courtyard Bar on Main Street and stayed until midnight. The following afternoon, December 21st, Sophie went to the Courtyard Bar where the owner, Dennis Quinlan, said she sat by the fire with an open crab sandwich. Around 2:30 p.m, she went to Brosnan's Spar supermarket where Sophie asked the teenage student working there if they carried the French newspaper Le Monde. He said it could be ordered and in for Monday, and she said she would be back then to collect it. Local resident Kerry Williams bumped into Sophie as she came out of the Spar. They apologised to each other and she noted how chic the woman was. She also noted Ian Bailey on the opposite side of the road, and he began walking in the same direction as Sophie. Sophie put her groceries in her car, made an ATM withdrawal of 200 Irish pounds, which is about €250 now or $275 at exactly 3:25 p.m. At 4:15 p.m, Sally Bulger was feeding her ponies when she saw Sophie's car outside her cottage. Sophie had put her groceries away, then drove down to the main road to a place called Keelfada and turned right. She was seen at a fruit and veg trader's, Jimmy Camier's, who had an outdoor trade post in Galeen, a village 5 kilometres away. She purchased some vegetables and Jimmy said he remembered her radiant face. That evening, Ian and his partner Jules arrived at the Courtyard Bar sometime after 7 p.m. Later that night, around 11:30 p.m, Ginny and Jules returned home together without Bailey. He had decided to stay on at the bar. According to Mark Murphy, a local man who arrived at the pub around 11 p.m, Jules was still there at that time. As the bar was closing, Mark asked if anyone fancied heading back to his place for a few drinks. Ian and local fisherman Robert Shelley took him up on the offer. Bailey came along carrying a naggin of whiskey. A naggin is a small 200ml bottle, usually of spirits, and they arrived at Mark's house around 12:30 a.m. About an hour later, Mark headed off to bed, leaving Bailey and Shelley chatting with Mark's mother, Patricia. At around 2 a.m, Bailey said he was going to walk home. His house was about 7 kilometres away, but shortly after leaving, he returned and asked if he could stay the night. Patricia agreed and let him crash on the couch. Patricia's partner Tony had gone to bed around midnight. He was annoyed to be woken by the commotion downstairs and even more irritated that Patricia didn't come to bed until 6 a.m. The next morning, Tony got up around 11:30 a.m. and spotted Bailey still in the house. He already didn't like the man. As Tony made breakfast, Bailey followed him into the kitchen. Tony told him he could make himself tea if he wanted, and Bailey replied that he was meant to be in Bantry by midday plucking turkeys. The timing seemed a little too convenient, as if Bailey was fishing for a lift. He mentioned it several times and eventually Tony snapped, "You're going to be very late, aren't you?" Then he left, clearly fed up. Later, he vented to Patricia. Of all the people to bring into the house, it had to be him. Tony had seen Bailey before, usually in pubs, shouting poetry and causing scenes. He knew he drank heavily, and more worryingly, people close to Jules had told Tony that Bailey had assaulted her on more than one occasion. Eventually, sometime between 2 and 2:30 p.m, Mark Murphy gave Bailey a lift back to the Prairie. These times, seemingly minor details at the moment, would later become critical in the murder investigation that was soon to unfold. Sophie spent the early part of the day catching up on some reading for work. Once she was finished, she decided to go for a drive to Three Castles Head, a remote and hauntingly beautiful spot on the Mizzen Peninsula. As peaceful as it seemed, something about the place left her unsettled. After her walk, Sophie stopped in to visit a French couple, Tommy and Yvonne Ungerer, who lived nearby. The two families shared a mutual friend, and Tommy was familiar with Sophie's husband Daniel. Yvonne was out at the time, and when she returned home around 2:30 p.m, Sophie was sitting with Tommy by the fire, a glass of wine in hand. Tommy told her Sophie had arrived about a half an hour earlier. They spent the afternoon talking and drinking red wine, with Sophie admitting she had felt an eerie sense of foreboding while walking around the ruins of the castle. Tommy described Sophie as seeming anxious. She left around 4 p.m, then drove about 20 minutes east toward the small village of Crookhaven. There, she stopped at O'Sullivan's Bar, a familiar and welcoming place she visited often during her stays in West Cork. One of the reasons she liked it so much, the O'Sullivan family, who all spoke fluent French. Dermot served her and she sat by the fire enjoying the warmth. She left just after 4:45 p.m. It would be the last time she was seen alive by anyone outside her home. Sophie returned to her holiday home and prepared a simple meal and made a phone call to her best friend Agnes to wish her happy birthday. The voicemail was recorded at 6:32 p.m. French time, 5:32 p.m. Irish time, indicating that Sophie had likely driven straight home from Crookhaven. Agnes didn't receive the voicemail until after midnight, so chose not to call her back. Around 6 p.m, local postman Tommy Hardnett stopped by, dropped off letters in the usual postbox near the gate, noticed the lights on both upstairs and downstairs of Sophie's house. At 7:30 p.m, Sophie called Josie to settle up what she owed her and spoke with her daughter Catherine as Josie was out. At 7:50 p.m, Sophie phoned her handyman Pat Haggerty, hoping to get work done on her fireplace. Again, his daughter answered and passed along the message. Josie finally called Sophie back at 9:45 p.m. The two spoke for about 15 minutes, with Sophie sounding upbeat, in good form, and they arranged to meet the next day around noon. This would be the last known conversation Sophie had. That evening, Jules Thomas was driving to Skull when she passed Mark Murphy. She noticed Ian Bailey sitting in the front seat and assumed Mark was giving him a lift back to their home. Later, when Jules returned, she and Bailey ate dinner together before heading into town around 9 p.m. Jules said they went to the Galley pub. She claimed she parked near Spar and that they were together the whole evening. Spar, again, as I mentioned before, is a supermarket chain. She sat quietly in the back while Bailey moved in and out with drinks, but multiple witnesses offered a different version of events. Shop assistant Mairead Murphy said she saw Bailey alone at O'Regan's pub earlier that evening playing a barron. A barron is a traditional Irish drum. And talking on his phone, presumably to Jules around 9:30 p.m. She said he had clearly been drinking. Later, she saw him again, this time at the Galley pub with Jules, chatting to the owner while Jules sat quietly in the corner of the front bar. Vanita, the pub owner's wife, supported this, saying Jules was there first, drinking alone, and Bailey arrived later through the side door. Her husband Dave recalled them being the last couple to leave that night, though he wasn't sure when they arrived. Bailey performed, playing the barron and reciting poetry. John McGowan, the Galley's barman, remembered Bailey still playing and singing between midnight and 1 a.m. While staff cleaned up, he said Bailey seemed in good spirits but not drunk. That statement, however, clashed with Bernadette Kelly's. She sat beside Bailey that night and said he had a posh English accent and still drink marks around his mouth, clearly intoxicated in her view. She said he and Jules left the pub carrying pint bottles of Guinness. The barman confirmed their final order: a drop of whiskey, a bottle of Guinness and a small bottle of wine. Bailey drank the whiskey in one go. After closing, Jules claimed Bailey brought their car around to the front of the pub so she could get in. But at that moment, Sergeant Gerard Prendeville happened to see Bailey sitting in the driver's seat. He knew Bailey was banned from driving and found it odd that he was alone in the car. The sergeant circled back to stop him, but by then Bailey was gone. Jules later claimed that if the Garda had waited just 15 more seconds, he would have seen her get into the passenger seat. She said they drove home the usual way along the bog road. But the conflicting accounts from that night would only deepen the mystery surrounding what happened hours later. So clearly here, some people are saying they saw the couple together. Some people are saying they arrived separately, with them seeing Jules first, then Bailey coming in. So there's a lot of like conflicting stories. Again, it's all hearsay, and people are obviously drinking, so it's hard to kind of imagine who is telling the correct story. And also, like, I feel like most of us aren't really paying too much attention. It's a Saturday night, you're out for the night. Are you paying that much attention about who arrives at what time? So it's kind of hard to figure it out. But the conflicting accounts just kind of like add to what becomes this huge kind of mess of an investigation, which we will obviously get to. Around 9:20 p.m. that evening, Shirley Foster noticed the light on at Sophie's. Again, Shirley Foster is the woman that lives with Alfie Lyons in the house behind Sophie's. So inside, Sophie was winding down for the night. She stayed up for another hour or so before heading upstairs to the back bedroom. After 10:30 p.m, she made a call to her husband Daniel. He was already on another call but rang her back about 12 minutes later. Sophie shared the details of her day and said she'd be flying into Toulouse on Christmas Eve. Arriving around 8 p.m. on an Aer Lingus flight, Daniel was delighted and promised to pick her up. They had plans to spend New Year's in Senegal. He remembered that she sounded tired but in good spirits. He told her it would be good to have her home for the holidays. It was after 11:30 p.m. in West Cork by the time they said goodnight. Daniel believed Sophie to be already in bed during both of their calls. It would be the last time the couple ever spoke. On the way home that night, something strange happened. Jules Thomas later recalled that halfway back, Ian Bailey made an unexpected stop. He pulled the car over but left the engine running. They were out near Liscaha just before the old Lower Town Creamery and came to a brief stop at a place called Hunt's Hill. Jules stayed in the car. Bailey asked her to come out with him, but she said it was too cold. He told her he was drawn to the full moon and the sweeping view across the bay. Then he pointed across the water and asked, "Is that Alfie's house over there? There's a light on." A few minutes later, he got back into the car. He told Jules he'd had a strange feeling, like a premonition, that something bad or even evil was going to happen near Alfie's house. He described it as a dark cloud hanging over the area, and then he said something even more settling. "I'm going to go where I saw the light." At 8:20 a.m. on the morning of December 23rd, Shirley Foster was in her kitchen making breakfast. By 10 a.m, she decided to take out the rubbish and head into town for some shopping. As she drove up the shared lane, she passed the back of Sophie's house. The gate was wide open. That immediately struck her as odd. Sophie always kept it closed. Her silver car was parked next to the house, but nothing else seemed out of place. Then, farther down the lane, something caught Shirley's eye. On the left-hand side of the road, she saw what looked like a piece of white material caught on a fence. As she slowed the car, she got a better look. At first, she thought someone had dumped a mannequin. But as she passed, the awful truth hit her. It was a body. Panic took over. Shirley leaned on the car horn, screaming, hoping to get her partner Alfie's attention. She got out of the car and ran through Sophie's field toward the house. Alfie came outside and met her at the gate. She told him, frantic, "There's a dead girl in the driveway." They rushed inside and called 999. Then together they went back down the lane. As they got closer, Alfie could see the figure on the ground. Blood on the face and shoulders, hair matted and soaked. Horrified, they ran back to their house and locked the door. Whoever had done this, they feared, could still be nearby. Trying to make sense of the scene, Alfie said they needed to tell Sophie what was going on. But when he looked out the window, he noticed something chilling. Sophie's upper gate, leading to her back door, was open too. That wasn't normal. He asked Shirley if she had opened it. She said no. Alfie made his way to Sophie's house and knocked on the window, then on the back door. That's when he saw it. Blood smeared near the handle. Terrified, he turned and ran back home. So at this point, obviously, they don't have a clue that this is Sophie. And I think that probably somewhere between panic and fear, and then also like she really was found like covered in blood, like unrecognizable. And you just kind of wouldn't even think, like, I couldn't imagine that it would be somebody I know that was dead. If I saw a body like that, you would just kind of think like, oh, it's some poor random person, and like, you don't know when it's happened. You could be thinking, okay, there's someone in the area, like, just killing people, right? Like, the fear I can imagine that they had, I felt really bad for them. Like, I don't know how old Shirley is, but like, Alfie's a 66-year-old man, you know, it's like so scary to think, like, who expects to find a dead body at their gate at the end of their driveway? And especially like rural Ireland in the middle of the 90s, like, it's just unheard of. Like, there really is not a lot of murders in Ireland, and if there is, it's almost always domestic situations. So I can only imagine how terrifying this actually was for them, you know. So at 10:10 a.m, the Foster's call came in to Banda Garda Station. Garda Eugene McCarthy answered. He immediately contacted the Skull Station and a patrol car was dispatched to the scene. By 10:38 a.m, Sergeant Gerard Prendeville, who had seen Ian Bailey the night before, the guy that was saw him behind the wheel of the car, arrived at the remote laneway along with Garda Byrne. About 10 metres up the driveway to Sophie's house, they saw the body. It was a female who was lying on her back, still wearing her boots. Her white clothing had been pulled to one side and was tangled in nearby barbed wire. As the officers approached, the full horror of the scene became clear. The woman's midsection was exposed. Her white top, soaked with blood, was pulled up toward her chest. Her face was badly injured, unrecognisable, pressed against a rock stained dark red. Her right arm was stretched outward, almost as if in motion. Her left arm rested straight at her side. Her leggings were torn, and through them her pubic hair was visible. Blood stained the fabric, and part of the waistband was caught in the barbed wire fence nearby. A large concrete block was placed near her left leg, weighing down a blue dressing gown. In one of her hands, it looked as if she was clutching strands of hair. She had no socks on, only boots. There were also bloodstains higher up on the bars of the gate at the entrance, suggesting a struggle may have taken place there before the final attack. The officers knew instantly this was not an accident. This was a brutal, deliberate killing. And soon they would learn the body was that of Sophie Toscan du Plantier. After Dr. Larry O'Connor arrived at 10:55 a.m. to confirm the woman was dead and had been for hours, Father Dennis Cashman arrived and later said he had never seen anything as brutal, shocking and horrific. By 12:15 p.m, Garda Malone left the scene to fetch a sheet of plastic to cover Sophie's body. The technical bureau team, based in Dublin, wouldn't arrive until after nightfall. And there was another problem. The state pathologist, Dr. John Harbison, was off duty for the Christmas holiday. When someone finally reached him at home, he made it clear he wasn't working. Not unless absolutely necessary. Now, just to make it clear, in Ireland, it's such a small country and cases like this are so rare. We have one state pathologist. That's it, just one. There's only ever been one. So, for him to say that he's not working, he's on holidays, and he wasn't going to work unless it was absolutely necessary. Like, what could be more necessary? There's been like this brutal murder. It makes me really angry. So with few other options, a call was made to the Scotland Yard Bureau for assistance, but high winds had grounded all flights. When Harbison was contacted again, he was furious at being disturbed, but eventually relented. I would have hated to have been the person who had to make that call. He agreed to attend, but would only fly, and the next available flight wasn't until the following day. Now, this now means Sophie's body is going to stay outside, exposed to the elements, for another night. And this guy, now, to explain the geography of the situation, Ireland is a tiny country. Yes, Dublin is a different county to Cork, but it's driving distance. Like, you literally could drive it. But no, my man has to fly. And saying that, the flight, I don't even know, can you get direct flights Cork to Dublin? From Kerry, where I live, which is the county just next to Cork, it takes less than an hour to fly to Dublin. And now I'm talking way less. It probably takes like half an hour. They say an hour, but it probably takes half an hour. I've done that flight many times. Like, it's a very, very short journey. And this guy's like, no, I'll go, but I'm only going to fly. Like, you could have driven down gotten the train. No, he has to fly. I mean, it's the most disgusting thing. When I tell you, it makes me like physically sick that this man disrespected this woman so freaking much. Like, it's a dead body and you're just like, no, first of all, I'm on my holidays, I'm not working right now, and how dare you disturb me, to, okay, fine, I'll do it, but I'm only going to fly there. Like, oh my God, it makes me so angry. It literally makes me so freaking angry. And like, from the beginning, this case was just freaking botched, and like, it starts with this to me is like, was the real thing that started the downfall of everything, because like, imagine all the evidence that's now getting lost. So as more Gardaí walk through the scene and floodlights are brought in, and the floodlights are soaking up and disturbing any type of condensation, so that's like then going to disturb the evidence that's already there. They now have lost any chance of establishing an accurate time of death, and this is something which is really, really important in any case, but definitely in this case. It's just they botched it. They completely and utter botched it. They had no respect for this woman. It's sick. So at 12:35 p.m, Josie Helen arrived at the house. Remember, Josie is Sophie's housekeeper, expecting to meet Sophie as they had arranged the night before. She asked quietly, is it her? Her husband Finbar was called forward and confirmed what everyone feared. The body was Sophie's. After 2 p.m, the death was announced on local radio, though no name or location was given. The community would soon begin to stir with rumours. Now, I will say, I do mention a lot of times here throughout the episode, but these are all significant, really important. This particular time and death announcement on the local radio, 2 p.m, becomes really important because, as I said, the time is 2 p.m. in the afternoon. No name is given, no location is given. Remember, this is a really remote area, hard to get to, hard to find, hard to, like, if you don't know it's there, you don't know it's there, you know what I mean? So pay attention to that, keep that in your head a little bit because it is important. So shortly after, Shirley Foster asked if she could still take her rubbish to the dump. Remember, that's why she was leaving the house in the first place. I personally think this is a very strange request, but also, like, the poor woman has just found a dead body, and, you know, it's pretty traumatizing. Like, who knows what anyone does in that situation. You're not obviously not thinking as you would normally. So the Gardaí examined the contents of her bins before letting her leave. As she drove off, she saw a white Ford Fiesta heading toward the scene. Inside were Ian Bailey and Jules Thomas. Shirley flagged them down, warning them the road ahead was closed off by police. Bailey replied he already knew that. He was there on assignment. So remember, this is significant again. Like, how did he know this had happened? He's there on assignment. Like, the announcement was made at 2 o'clock on local radio. And as we note next, Garda Malone notes the arrival in his notebook of Ian Bailey at the scene at 2:20 p.m. So this is only 20 minutes later. And the location and the name of the woman have not been given. Yet in 20 minutes, this man has already made his way to the crime scene, which again is in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing else surrounding it. It's not like you can see the Garda cars going there because there's no view from anywhere. So this is why I'm saying it's significant. How did he know? How did he know? We're going to go back over his story. But this, again, is very significant. So Bailey had walked up the lane towards Sophie's house, but the crime scene itself wasn't visible from where he stood. Garda Malone intercepted him and told him to turn back. Bailey left without protest. But something about the interaction didn't sit right. Malone found it odd. Bailey didn't ask a single question. That, he said, was unusual. In a previous encounter at the scene of a local accident, Bailey had persistently quizzed him for details, but this time nothing. The Garda noted how quickly he left and quietly marked him as suspicious. Meanwhile, Sophie's next of kin had yet to be officially informed. Gardaí was still waiting for a French translator. At 8 p.m, remember, she's discovered in the morning. It's now 8 p.m. Sophie's mother, Marguerite, was watching the evening news in France. That's when she heard a French woman had been murdered in Cork, Ireland. Panicked, she called Sophie's house. No answer. Again and again, the phone rang out. Daniel had seen the same news bulletin. He felt physically ill. He tried calling too. The line was busy, and for a moment that gave him hope. But then an unknown number rang his phone. It was the French ambassador to Ireland. The news was devastating. His wife was dead. But strangely, hours passed and Sophie's parents had no contact from Daniel and no word from Irish authorities. So desperate, the family phoned the local French police, but they also hadn't heard anything. Eventually, someone reached the Gardaí in Ireland, but they were told the name of the victim could not be released. It wasn't until they called Josie Helen that they got the truth. Sophie was gone. So, again, Daniel himself wasn't contacted right away either. He wasn't contacted for hours. That's her next of kin, her husband. Wasn't contacted for hours. Then Sophie's parents are calling everybody they can possibly get. No answers from anywhere. Still no call from anyone, because they're waiting for a French translator. I mean, we know the local guy in the town spoke French, the guy that owned the bar, and his family. You're telling me the whole entirety of Ireland you couldn't get a French translator, or you could have called them and asked if they spoke English anyway? Were you just assuming that they don't speak English? A lot of French people speak English. It's just so, again, it makes me so angry. And the fact that Daniel didn't call the parents right away, I find really strange, but also, maybe he's processing it himself, and, there could be several reasons for that. So I find it strange, but I'm not gonna, read too much into it at the same time. So, an hour after Sophie's parents were contacted, they left to deliver the unthinkable news to her teenage son Pierre, who was staying with relatives at the time. And her poor parents, and then having to go and tell their poor grandson that his mother has died in those circumstances, it's just really, 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 really horrendous. But it's just shameful how they were treated with no respect whatsoever from the Irish authorities. So at 1:40 p.m, Ian Bailey received a call at the Prairie. Remember, 1:40 p.m, important time to remember. On the line was Eddie Cassidy, a journalist with the Irish Examiner. Cassidy told Bailey that there had been a suspicious death somewhere in West Cork, but the details were scarce. No name, no confirmed location, and at that point, not even the nationality of the victim. He was hoping Bailey might be able to find out more. Bailey would later claim this was the very first time he heard about the murder, but what followed raised serious questions. Just 5 minutes after the call, at 1:45 p.m, Bailey rang Dick Cross, a correspondent for the Irish Independent. According to Cross, Bailey claimed he'd already been to the scene. He said he had a photo of the body and that Gardaí hadn't yet arrived. Cross logged the call in his notebook. 10 minutes later, at 1:55 p.m, Bailey called again. This time, Cross gave him the number of Padraig Byrne, a photo editor at the Irish Independent in Dublin. Byrne said Bailey contacted him shortly after, claiming he had a photo of the victim, both at the scene and one of her alive. When Byrne asked how he gotten the images, Bailey said he had taken them himself, describing the woman as very good looking. They arranged to have someone come collect the photographs. Bailey then got into the car with Jules Thomas and her camera. They drove straight to Dunmanus West, right to the scene. So, again, remember, the call that he just got is 1:40 p.m. It was announced on the radio, local radio, 2 p.m. about the death. No name, no nationality, no site where it happened, nothing. Yet he is telling this other journalist who the person is, and not only that, but he has already been to the scene and has photos of her body and a photo of her when she was alive, and they're now getting in the car and going straight to the scene. Tell me that's not weird. So As mentioned earlier, they were stopped by Garda Malone at 2:20 p.m. and turned away. It raised the question, how did Bailey know exactly where to go if no one had given him the location? After that, they drove to the post office in Turramore, where Bailey asked the name of the foreign woman who lived near Alfie Lyons. He was told Sophie Benoit, and Benoit was her maiden name. Instead of reporting back to the examiner who first contacted him, Bailey instead sent his story to the Star. By 3 p.m, Mike Brown, sent to collect the photographs, called Bailey at the Prairie. This time, Bailey claimed he no longer had a photo of the victim alive. Still, Brown went to the house and arrived around 3:45 p.m. Bailey told him the victim's name was Sophie and that while he didn't know her personally, he knew her to see. Again, this will end up being significant. At 4 p.m, Bailey met again with Eddie Cassidy, this time in person, along with photographer Dan Linehan. 2 press teams were now at the crime scene. And back at the scene, Shirley Foster had returned. She told Alfie that she'd seen Bailey earlier that day driving Joe's car. Alfie was surprised because he knew that Bailey was banned from driving. So on Christmas Eve at 11 a.m, Professor John Harbison, the state pathologist, finally arrived at the scene. Nearly 48 hours had passed since Sophie's body had been discovered. Harbison carried out his preliminary inspection, and shortly after, the hearse arrived to take Sophie's remains to Cork University Hospital for a full autopsy. Where Sophie's body had lain, there was a slight depression in the earth. Blood pooled where her head had rested. The indentation, investigators believed, had been caused by the sheer force of the blows to her skull. So, those blows were so strong, there was a slight depression in the earth where her head had been. And that is the most disturbing thing. Like, that is really, really violent. That is really a lot of, like, anger to me. That screams somebody was furious. So as Professor Harbison finished his work, Gardaí continued combing the area. They searched the field, dusted Sophie's car for fingerprints, and went through her house. Inside, everything appeared in order. The home was tidy. Her passport was sitting on a table. Nearby, they found her wallet. Inside were 10 crisp, brand new £20 notes. No signs of a break-in, no clear motive. Just a brutal, senseless killing with no obvious explanation. Out at the Prairie, Christmas preparations were well underway. According to Jules, they needed a few essential supplies, and Ian was adamant that he be the one to fetch them. She says she sent him off for cleaning products, including bleach for the bathroom, which she said was prone to mildew, along with fuel and some mesh wiring for the hens. He also needed to replace the blade on a saw. Billy O'Regan, who was working that day, remembered Ian Bailey coming in before noon. He says Bailey seemed preoccupied, flipping through that morning's edition of the Examiner, which was covering the killing. He asked to have the saw blade swapped out, claiming it was cutting crooked and he had a lot of work to do. Billy noticed scratches on Bailey's hands, especially on the left, and said he looked rough. About half an hour later, Bailey returned asking for 2 bales of briquettes and more mesh, and was sent out back to Dennis O'Callaghan to collect them. Dennis also noticed the scratches, what looked like briar scrapes on the back of Bailey's hand. I don't know if this is a common term, like, outside, like, I'm someone who grew up in Ireland, grew up in the countryside. Briars, if you don't know what they are, first of all, they're lethal, the scrapes you get from them. I had so many growing up, but it's like a really thick, so imagine like a lot of like thick bushes like all together, and you know, the randomness of the things that grow there, and like weeds and grass and just like little things like that. And then briars are like this really long, really, really thick branch that has like huge thick thorns that grow out of the side of it. Like, when I tell you, like, even thinking about them, I can like feel the scratches from them. Like, they would cut deep. So that is what that is, if you don't know what that is. I've never heard anyone say the word briar in America. I've never heard it, like, per se. Obviously I live in New York, it's very different. Definitely don't have any briars here. But even like when I think about shows and movies and things like that, whereas like in Ireland it's like a concept. Your countryside Ireland, you know what a briar is. So Dennis noticed scratches, said they looked like briar scrapes in the back of Bailey's hand. He described Bailey as being pale, agitated and not quite himself. When he asked if he was alright, Bailey reportedly replied, "I hope to be in a few hours." And Dennis found that to be an odd response. So when Bailey came back inside, Billy O'Regan once again took note of the scratches, and something else struck him as strange. The saw blade that Bailey insisted needed replacing, Billy said it was actually in perfect condition, so much so that he put it on the shelf for resale and it sold. So I think that the inclination here is that, you know, what was he cutting? Like, is this, you know, anything to do with like what happened? Explaining the cuts on his hand, etc. But I don't really know what, like, the inclination has always been that this blade, like him bringing it back, was something to do with like the murder. There was like, it was evidence or something like that, but like she wasn't cut with a saw in any way. So I don't know, was it just like that maybe he was cutting the clothes he was wearing that night, whatever it was. But it's always been something that's been kind of implied. And then, you know, people say that like, oh, because he put it up for resale, that, you know, someone bought it. And I think they bought it pretty soon after. So like, there's no way of kind of like testing it for DNA or whatever. But I don't know. I've never fully understood what the whole thing was. But then also, this whole thing with the scratches on his hand becomes really significant in a while. And he talks about like that he was cutting branches and Christmas trees down the day of the murder, and it's like, oh, that's how he got the scratches. But it's like, well, if he's replacing this saw blade that, you know, this man is saying is actually in perfect condition, so much so that he put it out for resale and it sold pretty much straight away, it's like, did he actually use it at all? But there's a lot of kind of questions about it, but that was always kind of the implication anyway, which is why I'm specifically mentioning it. You can kind of, you know, take it as you will. So anyway, later that day, Ian Bailey showed up at the annual Skull Christmas charity swim, an event he'd taken part in many times before, but this year he wasn't swimming. So I feel like I've seen stuff like this like in other countries and stuff too, but in Ireland it's very popular thing that on Christmas morning people take a Christmas swim in the sea. People usually go to the beach and like it's like a big gathering. A lot of the times it's for charity. Some places just do it just cause. It's just kind of like an annual kind of a tradition. So girl called Florence Newman was there with her father's video camera capturing the day's festivities. She approached Bailey and asked him to recite a poem, something he was usually more than happy to do, but this time he refused, which was very out of character for him, she thought. When she pressed him, he mumbled a few words and then said "Shin will," which is an Irish phrase that roughly means that's all. You can watch this video on 92. I'll try and link it in the bio for the episode's notes. So the camera briefly caught his hands, but not clearly enough to see anything definitive. Still, Florence remembered that something seemed off. He looked unsettled. She also noted that he was wearing sneakers, which was not typical for him. But it was when she shook his hand that she really noticed it. Strange markings across the back. She described them as parallel lines, maybe 4 or 5, even 6 of them. To her, they stood out. So this is now the third person that has noticed these scratches all over his hand. So I feel like if so many people are noticing it, they must have been quite significant. So later that same day, Ian Bailey paid a visit to his nearest neighbours, the Jacksons. He'd seen them earlier that morning during the traditional Christmas swim and returned now to borrow a few household items. They chatted briefly and the conversation turned inevitably to the murder. Bailey mentioned he had met Sophie a couple of times before. Again, this is significant. After he left, the Jacksons talked among themselves. Something about Bailey's behaviour didn't sit right. They described him as having a nervous, anxious energy, even earlier that day at the swim. He wasn't wearing his usual heavy boots, but instead sneakers and with no socks. The entire encounter left them uneasy. While Sophie's parents and brother travelled to Ireland almost immediately after her death, her husband Daniel did not. It wasn't until January 7th that he formally spoke with investigators, members of the French judicial police acting on a request from the Irish authorities. He described Sophie as a strong and complex woman. Quote, she was dynamic and impulsive, not the kind to let herself be walked over. She had a strict moral code, feared nothing, and preferred to avoid the world of social gossip. She liked places that were lively but low-key, where she felt more at ease, end quote. When asked about the holiday home in West Cork, Daniel revealed something surprising. He said, quote, I only visited once 3 or 4 years ago, but Sophie told me how much she loved the place, the countryside, the long walks. She would go there several times a year with friends, relatives, and sometimes the children, end quote. He said she typically wore pyjamas, a night vest or a t-shirt to bed while staying in the cottage. There were no issues with the English neighbours, but there had been a disagreement with local Irish neighbours over a boundary line. Then he said something chilling, quote, Sophie was not the kind of woman to hide if she heard a noise outside. She would go out and investigate. I saw her do that many times, end quote. Daniel insisted she would never have had an affair during their marriage and said he knew of no other relationships in Ireland. When asked who might have done this, he simply said, quote, I have no idea who the killer could be. I can't imagine any motive except an act of senseless violence, end quote. Daniel ended the interview by saying he had no plans to return to Ireland but would gladly meet with Irish investigators in Paris if needed. Now, it may seem strange that he did not travel to Ireland when her parents did. Like, wouldn't you want to be there? It's her husband, next of kin. I mean, there could be many reasons for that. Maybe he felt like it was too much for him to go. He was grieving, devastated. Maybe he didn't deem it necessary for him to be there. Maybe he didn't want to see the crime scene. And I can understand all of that. And, you know, he offers an explanation of saying that, you know, I'll gladly meet with the Irish investigators in Paris if they want to meet me here, but that he wasn't going. And that has been read into many times in many different ways. Obviously, people always look at the husband first, but I think personally it can be explained away. So I try not to read too much into it. So when journalist Senan Maloney first encountered Ian Bailey at the crime scene, what struck Maloney wasn't the location, it was what Bailey said. He spoke with an almost unsettling precision, carefully enunciating strange and specific details about the crime. He mentioned that Sophie had used the name Bunwal in West Cork, something not reported in the media at the time. Bailey explained that here in Ireland, Sophie seemed to lead a very different kind of life. Her husband, he said, was a major figure in French cinema, but he never came to West Cork. According to Bailey, Sophie would visit with different people, girlfriends and sometimes men. Then came more. Bailey spoke of her arrival from the airport in a rental car. He noted the lights at her house had gone off and on that night, and he even recalled the specific times. He described 2 used wine glasses left on the draining board in the kitchen and mentioned that Sophie had bought red wine. Most chilling of all, Bailey described the body, her clothing, the concrete block. He said Gardaí had even taken a large stone from beside the body. For Senan Maloney, it was overwhelming. The sheer amount of detail left his head spinning. How could Bailey know so much? Maloney was convinced someone in the Gardaí must have been feeding him information. But Bailey didn't stop there. He said Sophie had clearly run down the slope trying to get away before she fell near the gate. He also knew personal facts, that she had a son, knew the son's name, and that Sophie had been married before. It was too much, too precise for a man who claimed to know nothing. Senan Maloney followed Ian Bailey toward the scene of the murder, or at least as far as they could go. But just before reaching the area, Bailey suddenly stopped. He refused to go any further. He told Maloney he had given him all he could and said he'd wait there until Maloney got back. It was an odd moment. Why lead him all that way only to stay behind? So, if this sounds a little confusing, so this is the morning of the crime. So at this point, Bailey has already shown up with jewels that the Gardaí and Shirley Foster have already seen him and taken note of it. And now he's bringing Senan Maloney, who was the first reported guy that showed up at the scene, from the press, and it had already been arranged by his boss that the local reporter Ian Bailey was going to guide him to the scene because it was so remote and because it was so hard to find. So that's just if it's a little confusing too. So when Maloney did reach the Gardaí at the scene, they weren't exactly helpful. They refused to share any information and directed him instead to the Garda press office. Frustrated, he returned to Bailey. Maloney told him, "I'll file the story in your name then, since these were all your details." But Bailey quickly shut that down. He told Maloney not to do that, saying it would actually be doing him a favour to keep information under Maloney's own byline. But he was baffled. It didn't make sense. Like, why would you... Like, he got all the information. He's the one who knew everything, gave him all the stuff. He's also saying he himself is a freelance reporter, so why wouldn't he want the story to be under his name if it's being offered to him? So again, that seems quite a strange thing. So on the way back, Bailey turned the conversation toward the crime itself. He asked what Maloney made of it. Maloney said it felt like overkill, like a crime committed in the heat of rage, not one that had been planned. He imagined the killer as a man in his prime, maybe between 25 and 40, strong, angry, someone who knew the area well. The scene was so remote, so difficult to even find, that it seemed almost impossible a stranger could have ended up there by accident. All the while, Bailey remained silent. When pressed for his own opinion, he finally muttered that there was a lot more to it than meets the eye, and added that it could go on for weeks. Maloney left the encounter uneasy. Bailey had shared so many specific details about the crime, but seemed to have no thoughts, no theories about who might have done it. And then there was the strangest detail of all. Bailey had been talking for months about returning to journalism. Now, a brutal and mysterious murder had occurred right on his doorstep. Just days after Sophie's brutal murder, an article appeared in the Star, written under the byline of none other than Ian Bailey. In the piece, Bailey claimed Sophie had a clump of her attacker's hair in her hand and that traces of skin had been found beneath her fingernails, suggesting she had fought back. These were incredibly specific details, and more than that, they hadn't been released publicly. The post-mortem had only been carried out 3 days earlier. How could Bailey possibly know this? 2 days before, on December 26th, he'd written another piece, again in the Star. In that article, Bailey reported that Sophie had been beaten to death with a blunt instrument, that she died from multiple head injuries, and that she had not been sexually assaulted. Again, this was information that wouldn't be officially confirmed for weeks, yet Bailey had it the day after the post-mortem. Even the pathologist hadn't gone public with those findings. Bailey wrote again in the Star on January 3rd and claimed that several men were being asked to submit hair samples, presumably to compare with the hair found clutched in Sophie's hand. He speculated that Sophie might have been followed all the way from France to Ireland. He painted a vivid picture of her personal life, describing her marriage to Daniel as open, noting how Daniel had not visited the murder scene and claiming that Sophie used her maiden name while in West Cork. He even suggested she may have had a visitor at her house that night and that this visitor murdered her as she walked them to the gate. He speculated further that 2 local men could have heard her screams but dismissed them as the cry of a fox. I don't know if you guys have ever heard what a screaming fox sounds like. Let me tell you, it's pretty freaking frightening, and it does actually sound like a woman screaming. Look it up on TikTok. That's where I've seen many videos of it. There's also these videos currently that I keep seeing on my timeline of animals, specifically birds usually, but like other animals too, and like how they look versus what they sound like when they make whatever sounds that they make. It's crazy. Like, some birds, when I tell you, sound so frightening, like scary. Not like pretty bird song that you hear outside your window in the morning, but like actually kind of terrifying. That like if you were in, you know, the wilderness somewhere and you heard like in the distance something screaming like that, you would think like, oh my god, there's like a monster, like something is coming to get me. Like, it's crazy. I seem to just be getting them all over my time. You know how it is, you watch one video like that or you interact with it, and anyway, next thing your whole timeline is full. But honestly, kind of fascinating, but also kind of frightening and disturbing at the same time. So as the days passed, the press, led in part by Bailey's reporting, began to spiral into salacious territory, as they frickin' do. There were stories suggesting Sophie was planning to divorce Daniel and reunite with her first husband. Others claimed she had been married 3 times. Some reported that she visited Ireland with different men each time. Again, like, these are things that would only be written about a woman. If this had been a man that was murdered, you'd never see these stories coming out. It's only everyone is a woman. They have to find a reason for it. It's like, they have to be like, oh yeah, well, she was a huge slut, so like, no wonder some guy was mad at her and killed her. Or like, you know, God forbid, like, this woman, especially 90s in Ireland, like, oh, this like fancy French woman is coming to stay in the middle of nowhere. Like, why is she in the middle of nowhere? Why is she by herself? Like, you know, people just have to find like some fault with her. Happens every freaking time. You'll never see that with a male murder victim. Like, rarely happens, especially when it comes to like how many partners they had, etc. So in one piece, Bailey quoted a local trader, Bill Hogan, though he didn't name him directly. He wrote that Sophie had confided in this man, saying she planned to leave her husband. Bill himself was livid. He had never said that. In fact, he said it had never happened at all. But Bailey didn't stop. He continued embellishing, spinning theories, suggesting the killer may have come from France, or that it could even have been a local woman, since women were also being DNA tested. One local said Bailey even floated the idea that Daniel had mafia ties and that he had taken out a life insurance policy on Sophie, naming himself as the beneficiary. None of this was true. At Sophie's funeral on December 30th, her close friend Agnes said Daniel was devastated, racked with guilt over not being there to protect his wife. He linked arms with Sophie's son Pierre-Louis as they followed her coffin. Meanwhile, Ian Bailey told people he was planning to go to France himself to investigate. But later, Bailey told Senan Maloney he could now no longer go to France. Why? Because he now considered himself the chief suspect in Sophie's murder. He feared that if he left Ireland, he'd be arrested. Maloney was stunned. Then, Bailey said something even stranger, that he couldn't actually remember what had happened the night of the murder, that maybe, just maybe, he should visit a hypnotist to try and recover the memory. As soon as Maloney left, he phoned the Gardaí, and he wasn't alone in his suspicions. Bill Hogan also recalled thinking to himself, Bailey did it. Meanwhile, Sophie's post-mortem results were devastating. Her long hair had become tangled in the surrounding vegetation. There were deep, gaping wounds on the right side of her forehead. Her right ear was torn, her cheek scraped, and shockingly, her brain tissue was exposed through a massive fracture. The depression in her skull ran from her eyebrow to her temple. In her right hand, several strands of hair were found, some wrapped around her fingers. Early on, this was considered a possible clue to her attacker's identity. But unfortunately, forensic analysis showed they were Sophie's own hairs. It appeared she had touched her head wounds in her final moments, the strands pulling free as she did so. Something about that is just so sad to me, because, like, you know when you get hurt or you feel a pain somewhere in your instinct, like you just touch it, you reach out and you touch it, and just thinking of like something like that happening to her, and she's like reaching out like she knows something's wrong with her head, and then like all of her hair coming away in her hands, like it's just so devastating. The cause of death was ruled as multiple fractures to the skull and severe lacerations to the brain. She'd suffered gross injuries to her head, neck, arms and hands. The hand wounds, clearly defensive, showed she had fought back. The report also made repeated note of something specific. A Doc Marten boot may have been used to kick or stomp Sophie's body. A partial boot print had been found in the mud at the scene, somewhat consistent with the classic 1460 8-eye boot. While it didn't exclude other brands, it almost certainly wasn't from Sophie's own footwear. No official time of death could be confirmed. Her body had been left exposed to the elements for too long. I mean, again, that could have been resolved. But the circumstances pointed to her being killed sometime the previous evening or night. 20 years later, Sophie's body would be exhumed by French authorities. They found no issue with any part of Professor Harbison's original findings. So the Gardaí launched a community-wide effort to retrace Sophie's final movements. Questionnaires were delivered to every household in the area. One man, Sean Murray, said he'd seen Sophie in her rental car at a garage in Skibbereen the day she arrived. He claimed a man was sitting in the passenger seat, but for several reasons, including inconsistencies in the timeline, there was doubt as to whether it was really her. Another person said they saw Sophie at her own local filling station. At the same time, the French investigation was getting underway. Sophie's husband Daniel said he would personally oversee it. One man of interest in France was Bruno Carbonet, with whom Sophie had had an affair. He had previously visited her in West Cork, but Bruno had a solid alibi. Meanwhile, Bailey continued to file stories, often confusing or contradictory. In one article, he claimed Gardaí were searching for a murder weapon in a disused mine, but this didn't make any sense. The concrete block and rock used in the attack had already been found. The weapons were known. The investigation had moved on. January 11th, 1997, a call came into Bandon Garda Station and it stood out immediately. The woman on the line didn't give her real name. She said to call her Fiona. She claimed she'd seen a man at Keelfada Bridge around 4 a.m. on Monday, December 23rd, the night Sophie was murdered. She described the man as wearing a long black coat and some kind of hat. He looked disoriented, she said, stumbling, wiping at himself. When Gardaí pressed her for more details, she hung up. The call was traced to a public phone box on Cormarket Street in Cork City. Whoever Fiona was, she was being extremely careful. Gardaí carried out a full search at Keelfada Bridge, but found nothing. Meanwhile, Bailey had been interviewing Yvonne Ungerer, a friend of Sophie's, the one that she called to her and her husband after she'd finished her walk, where she felt uneasy that day. So Yvonne recalled how Sophie had felt on her walk that day, feeling like something or someone was watching her. Bailey, in response, said he'd felt something similar. He spoke of a strange black feeling he'd had while standing on Hunt's Hill on the night of the murder. He even called it a premonition. Yvonne later told Gardaí she remembered him saying that his premonitions usually came true, that he'd been looking in the direction of Sophie's house when he said it. To Gardaí, this was a critical detail. It meant Bailey had stopped at Hunt's Hill that night, right near the scene. Soon after, Crimeline, a crime reconstruction TV programme in Ireland, began filming a dramatisation of Sophie's time in Ireland. Now, I gotta say, here, Crimeline, for me, growing up, probably the reason why I got into true crime from such a young age. I used to watch that as a kid. In my head, I feel like it was on a Monday night. I could be wrong. My mom used to watch it religiously. And they used to have like reconstructions, or they would have like CCTV footage and whatever. But I just remember loving it. And like Marion Finucane is the lady who used to present it. She's passed away since. She was a great reporter, but her voice is just very significant to me. Takes me right back. I can just hear her. I can picture the desk she would sit at and all the Gardaí behind, and with all the old 90s style computers and TV screens. People would phone into the show with information. Like they have versions of it in most countries probably. I know they definitely do in the US, but I really credit it as being one of the reasons I got into true crime so young. And there was also this other show. I've tried so hard for years to find what this show was called. I feel like it was maybe a short running show, but it was like they, not so much like crimes that were like had just happened, but like they would do crimes from like, you know, centuries ago, and it was basically like all based in Ireland, and it was like reconstructions of like murders and things like that. And there was this guy who, it would always be nighttime, and he'd be like this kind of older guy. He'd be walking around like maybe in a park or something, usually I'm guessing in Dublin city, and it would always be nighttime. He'd have like a trench coat on, and he would do, you know, the kind of in between you know, presenting the case and the voiceovers and whatever, and like something about his voice and like the setting. I was obsessed with that show, but like it used to actually kind of scare me because I knew all the stories were true. God, I really need to figure out what it's called. I need to do some like Googling because it has to be out there somewhere. But I was obsessed with it. So those two shows, that and Crimeline, are definitely the two things that got me into true crime from such a young age. Like, yeah, I think I don't think there was anything else that really like stands out. Definitely those two. I really, really think that they were the ones that did it. But yes, So anyway, getting on with it. So Crime Line in the reconstruction cast an actress named Anne Cahalan who bore an eerie resemblance to Sophie. So one day during filming, a tall man came bounding across the fields. It was Ian Bailey. He introduced himself to Anne as a local reporter covering the case. He claimed he had known Sophie, again significant, and they had met her right there on that very stretch of land. Anne later recalled how excited and intense he seemed. Her partner Peter came over and Bailey repeated the same story. So that's now 2 people again in this instance who have said that he claimed to have known Sophie. The crew had been instructed not to talk to anyone about the production. Eventually, Bailey got the message and left. When the Crime Line episode aired, it triggered a spike in calls to the Gardaí. During the broadcast, the Gardaí appealed directly to Fiona to come forward in confidence, and the very next day, she did. Again, this lady Fiona, she's about to become very significant to this case, but not so much in a good way. Yeah, she's a bit of a character, this Fiona girl. So let's get on with the crazy. So Fiona called again, repeating what she had said earlier about the man at the bridge. Gardaí tried to keep her talking, urging her to come into the station, but she was nervous and hung up after a minute. But this time, the call was traced to a phone box in the village of Leap. 3 days later, Fiona called again. All she said was she wouldn't be coming in, then hung up. This call was traced to a private home in Skull. That's when Gardaí began comparing her voice to previous recordings. Eventually, Garda Kevin Kelleher recognised it. It was a lady called Marie Farrell, a local woman who ran Tara Fashions on Skull's main street. The address matched the phone line. So 4 days later, Garda Kelleher approached Marie at her shop and asked her to watch footage of the town's Christmas swim, an excuse to get her talking. And this next bit is weird. She agreed to view it at his home. Strange, right? I think she was scared of talking to Gardaí in public, but to suggest going to his home was they could have said, oh, I'll watch it at the Garda station or whatever, but at his house? Strange. So once there, he asked, are you Fiona? Marie paused and said, fuck it, I should never have made that phone call from my home. To me, that's just such an Irish response anyway, but yeah, this lady, I just can't. So anyways, she agreed to meet 2 detectives. She told them she was afraid her husband Chris would find out who she'd been with that night. Kelleher remembered her referencing Ian Bailey, specifically saying she'd seen him at the bridge. She even agreed to show them the exact location. It looked like a breakthrough in the case, but what followed was anything but straightforward. So Marie's story began to change. The time of the sighting, no longer 4 a.m, now it was 3 a.m. She said she had been the passenger in a car, not the driver. She refused to name the driver, saying it was a former partner, someone who was also married, and that she didn't want her husband to find out. She had told Chris she was out getting Christmas drinks with girlfriends, but in truth, she'd gone for a late night drive with this man near Barley Cove, staying there for some time. But no one had seen them, no witnesses in the caravan parks or along the beach there. Marie pointed out a specific spot on Keelfodder Bridge. She said the man she'd seen was rubbing his hands up and down his face like he was washing it or applying aftershave. She now believed it was Ian Bailey, the same man she'd seen outside her shop the Saturday before the murder. At first, she said Sophie had come into her shop that same day but didn't buy anything. Later, she changed that, claiming Sophie had bought a brown sweater, but no such item was found at Sophie's home and there was no record of a purchase. She told Gardaí the man at the bridge was on the far side toward the sea, walking west away from Sophie's holiday home. His hands were up, covering his face, though Gardaí thought that could have just been a reaction to headlights. Later, she changed that detail too, saying he had actually been on the other side of the bridge, but still walking west. In court later on, her story would change again. Now she would say she was alone in the car, that her former partner had dropped her to her vehicle and she drove herself back to Skull. And she claimed that that man had since died. So Marie had made an anonymous statement to Gardaí on Christmas Day, this time under her real name. She described a suspicious man outside her shop in Skull on Saturday, December 21st. He was tall, wore a long black coat down to his ankles and a black beret. He was pacing near the butcher's shop, taking long strides. She said Sophie had also passed by that day, walking toward the Allied Irish Bank, just as the strange man had. Dan Griffin, another local, also reported seeing a tall man in Skull that weekend, wearing a long black coat and a black beret. He estimated the man was in his late 30s to early 40s and over 6 feet tall. He remembered the man's stride, long and purposeful. Weeks later, Dan saw the man again, this time linking arms with a woman. It was then he realised the man was Ian Bailey. The black beret he'd remembered may have actually been Bailey's thick dark hair. So Marie said she saw Bailey again on Sunday, December 22nd, around 7 or 7:30 a.m. on her way to a market stall in Cork City. He was thumbing for a lift even though they were going in opposite directions. He was wearing the same clothes and had stubble. At the time, she still didn't know who he was. If it was Bailey, it would have meant he had tried and failed to leave the area twice that night. The second time at 2 a.m, remember when Mark Murphy said he tried to leave their party but ended up getting driven home much later. Marie's shop closed over the holidays. She travelled to England with her husband to buy stock and didn't reopen until January 17th, which may explain the long delay between her calls to the Gardaí as Fiona. That same day, she said she saw the man again, this time outside the post office. He looked different now, thinner, pale, clean-shaven, wearing a mauve Macintosh and green wellies. She got a fright. 2 Gardaí happened to enter her shop just then, and she told them about the man, but by the time they looked, he was gone. Later, she spotted him again outside Brosnan's shop and pointed him out to Gardaí. She said she didn't want him to see her talking to them. That man was Ian Bailey. Marie also confided in her 14-year-old babysitter Leah Quinn. She told Leah the man she had seen at the bridge was Ian Bailey. She even added new details, saying she saw him by the river washing his hands. Like, why would you confide in a 14-year-old? Like, I'm sorry, this woman is so bizarre to me. So when she said to her that she saw him washing his hands by the river, this, people think, may have been the origin of one of the more long-lasting rumours in the case, which was that a man had been seen washing his boots near the bridge. I remember always hearing about this too and just kind of had assumed it was fact. So what began as a possible breakthrough was quickly turning into a tangled web of contradictions. Marie Farrell's testimony would continue to shift over time, and in the years to come, she would dramatically reverse her claims altogether. Even now, like, there's so many documentaries, by the way, about this case, and I'll put a link to some of them. They're interesting to watch, even if you don't, pay that much attention to them. I feel like there's so much, like, hearsay with it. But every documentary interview I've seen of her, like, it's like, she's telling a different story again of what happened. Like, the woman is just so infuriating. Like, I cannot even tell you. But anyways, that also reminds me that there is a brilliant podcast about this case. It's something West Cork. I'll find it and I'll add it again to the show notes. But it's a really, really brilliant account of this is a very short podcast series too. If you're into like serial, I think that you'll really enjoy it. But I will put a link to it, and if you want like a little more detail, it's great in terms of like atmosphere, because they're out on the streets and like walking around and interviewing people. It's not just like in a studio kind of, which is what I really appreciated about it. And there's no kind of like judgment to anything. They're just literally telling the story as they're hearing it. So definitely check that out if you want to hear more about this. I don't gatekeep, and I'm not going to be like only listen to my podcast. Like, there's great podcasts out there about this kind of thing as well. So anyways, at the start of the investigation, Gardaí had a list of 54 people of interest. Alfie Lyons, Sophie's closest neighbour, was quickly ruled out. I know a lot of people were like, why wasn't he looked into? A lot of people even now still think that he's the person that did it. I really, really don't. The reason why he was ruled out, his partner Shirley gave him a strong alibi, and physically he just wasn't considered capable of the kind of violence involved in Sophie's death. Remember, he was 66. He wasn't physically very strong. I think the fact that he'd broken into Sophie's house at one point while she was away, like he only broke in to have a bath, and the only reason she realised is because the bath was dirty and one of the windows was open. He never did anything like, I mean, it's a strange thing to do, but it's just like, there's no running water in my house. Oh, Sophie's house is vacant. No one's there. No one's using it. Let me just go have a bath. Like, it seems like quite harmless, you know? And I think too, because they had previously had a little bit of like beef about the ownership of the storehouse that was in between both their houses, but like it wasn't really anything major, and it all got resolved, and like they still were, you know, very pleasant to each other, and there was no like remaining kind of hard feelings or anything like that. It wasn't quite as dramatic as like people seem to think that it was. So I definitely don't think that Alfie had like anything to do with it whatsoever. So then came a detail that puzzled investigators. Ian Bailey and his partner Jules Thomas had told Gardaí that they'd spent Sunday night at the Courtyard Bar, but other witnesses said they'd been at the Galley, and they claimed to have been together at home on Saturday night, but that didn't line up either. The Murphys, a local family, said Bailey had actually been at their house in Skull that night. To clear things up, Gardaí decided to speak directly with Bailey. On January 14th, Garda Oliver Goggin, my last name is Goggin, just in case you didn't know. It's not a name that you hear a lot at all, even in Ireland. It's actually Welsh, but usually when I do hear it, it's Goggins with an S in the end. So whenever I see anything with Goggin, I'm always like, hey, that's my cousin. So anyways, I don't think there's any relation here though. So on January 14th, Garda Goggin went to see him. Bailey was agitated, hyper nervous and jittery. He couldn't sit still, constantly getting up to refill his coffee. He talked about conducting his own investigation into the murder and claimed he believed there was a French connection, but refused to explain further. Goggin left that meeting feeling uneasy, he said. A few days later, Bailey turned up at Skull Garda Station to clarify his Saturday night whereabouts. He now claimed he'd stayed with a friend at Skull, information he'd volunteered only after visiting the Murphys and likely realising the Gardaí were aware his earlier story didn't match up. Bailey also gave an odd explanation for his visible scratches and marks. He said he'd been killing turkeys and cutting down a Christmas tree, which is how he got injured. It all raised more questions than answered. So, remember how I was talking earlier about the visible scratches from the briars that he claimed were from briars? This again is where it kind of starts becoming more significant, because he's kind of trying to use it as like the cover that he was killing turkeys, cutting down Christmas trees and whatever. So on February 10th, Ian Bailey was arrested at his home studio on suspicion of murdering Sophie. He was handcuffed. As Gardaí led him away, Bailey insisted they were making a big mistake and they had the wrong man. The drive to Bandit Garda Station took about an hour, during which time Bailey spoke freely. He told Sergeant Liam Hogan that he had nothing to do with Sophie's death. He said it was journalist Eddie Cassidy who first told him about the murder and that Jules had driven him to the scene. But Detective Garda Culligan questioned how they had ended up at the exact location of the crime. Bailey paused, sighed, and said he just had a hunch that it must have been the French woman who lived near Alfie Lyons. And again, just to point out, like, you know, nobody knew the nationality at that time. It could have been an Irish person, but this is an area that a lot of and you probably can figure that out already from the people that I've mentioned. There's French people, British people, whatever. It is a town that people come to, have holiday homes there, or they move there. It's one of those kind of places that there is kind of a rather large amount of people who are not actually from Ireland that live there. So even to assume, like, even if you had heard, oh, it's not Irish, like they're, you know, a foreigner, that, like, why would you immediately assume it was Sophie if there's already so many international people living there? You know what I'm trying to say? So this raised another red flag. Sergeant Hogan asked how Bailey could have known she was even in Ireland at the time. Bailey hesitated and then changed course, saying he shouldn't say anything more until he spoke to a legal advisor. So again, like, even, you know, if he were to be like, oh yeah, there's that lady Sophie that lives here, like, how would he happen to, she just happened to be in the area, like, how would he know? Because on one hand, and you'll know this as we go on, I don't think I've gotten to it yet, but like, he's been saying all along to a few people by now that like he's met her before, but he soon changes that to no, never met her, knew there was a person there but didn't know her, never saw her, never met her, denies everything. And then it's like, well, how would you know she was there if you didn't know she was there, if you didn't know her, if you hadn't seen her in the town or whatever, you know? So Beatty asked if he would be provided a legal advisor at the station, and from a list offered by the Gardaí, he eventually selected solicitor Con Murphy. So Beatty's arrest wasn't without reason. Investigators had concerns about several things, including the scratches on his hands, the false alibi he'd initially given, and the reported sighting of him at Keelfodder Bridge in the early hours of the morning Sophie was killed. When questioned about the inconsistencies in his alibi, Beatty said he hadn't remembered everything clearly at first, but once he did, he went straight to the Gardaí. They challenged him on that, pointing out that he had first gone to speak with the Murphys before correcting his story. So he claimed he met Patricia Murphy on the road, but admitted he'd also called to her door. When asked if Jules had been with him, he initially said no, but in fact, she had been. They pressed him on Sunday night. Had he left the house after returning home? Beatty said no. He claimed he went to bed and stayed there all night and that Jules would back up his story. Not long after, Con Murphy arrived at the station and advised Beatty to remain silent or say as little as possible. When the subject of Keelfodder Bridge came up, Beatty denied ever being there at 3 a.m, dismissing the alleged sighting outright. And through it all, he continued to deny any involvement in Sophie's murder. Around the same time as Ian Beatty's arrest, Jules was also taken into custody. Gardaí had secured warrants to search both their home and Beatty's studio. Detective Gardaí Eugene Gilligan had been given a list of clothing items Beatty was reportedly seen wearing at the pub on the night of the murder: a dark blue or black overcoat, a hat and big boots. But during the search, none of those items were found. What they did find raised more questions. Behind the studio, they discovered the remains of a fresh fire. Among the ashes were what appeared to be charred bits of a mattress, buttons from a coat, burned jeans and boots. But by then, any trace of DNA or blood evidence was already destroyed. So, like, yes, I know that's kind of his uniform, according to people. Like, he wears a long overcoat, usually dark jeans and boots. Because remember, everybody thought it was so strange when they saw him wearing sneakers. So, it's definitely a weird coincidence like that, you know. He just happens to have a fresh fire at his studio that he's renting that contains remains of a coat, jeans and boots. Like, I know a lot of people do stuff like that and burn clothes and burn like old things they don't need, which obviously very bad for the environment, can't condone. But you know, it could be a coincidence that like who doesn't have a coat, jeans and boots in their house that they wanted to get rid of, burn, whatever. You know, it can be explained, but also like it is kind of a weird coincidence at the same time that happens to be, you know, the things that they were kind of looking for in the first place, like the boots in particular. So before being questioned, Jules consulted with solicitor Michael Doody. She told Gardaí that on the Sunday night in question, she'd gone to bed early after taking 2 pills for period pain. She described herself as a light sleeper and said Bailey never left the bed. He was there all night until 9 or 10 the next morning. But that story soon changed. She recalled Beatty saying he had seen Sophie at Brosnan's supermarket that weekend, and when asked again about the night of the murder, Jules offered a new account, one that seriously damaged his alibi. She said Ian had been restless in bed that night. Eventually he got up, trying not to disturb her. After that, she couldn't recall him coming back. The next thing she remembered was him bringing her coffee around 9 a.m. When she got up, she noticed a scratch on his forehead, something she hadn't seen the day before, and it looked fresh. When she asked about it, Beatty claimed he'd scratched it on a stick. She also noticed he looked tired and had fresh scratches on his hand. Jules told Gardaí she believed Beatty could have taken the car without her noticing, something he'd done before by quietly freewheeling it down the hill. When asked outright whether she thought he might have done it, she hesitated. She said he'd seemed so normal after talking to Eddie Cassidy, the reporter who broke the news to them, and had acted completely calm throughout the Christmas holidays. She said she hadn't suspected a thing. But then came the sighting of Bailey at Keelfodder Bridge at 3 a.m. If that was true, she told Gardaí that she had been completely duped. That wasn't somewhere he would normally be. Putting it all together, she admitted that there now seemed to be strong evidence connecting him to the murder. She went over her previous statements, signed them all, and just before her release told Gardaí she felt betrayed and abused by Ian. Back at the station, Bailey was giving blood and fingerprints. 2 senior officers took over his questioning and cautioned him again. He denied the murder once more. When confronted with witness statements placing him at Keelfata Bridge, Bailey insisted they were wrong, that he was in bed the entire night. That's when Detective Superintendent Dermot Dwyer told him what Jules had just revealed, that he had in fact gotten out of bed and returned in the morning with a fresh scratch on his face. Bailey looked stunned. He denied it. Then slowly his story began to shift. He said, quote, "We got home between 1 and 2 o'clock and went to bed. I'd stopped on my way home at Hunt's Hill and looked at the moon. Sometime after going to bed, I got up and did a bit of writing in the kitchen. I then went down to the studio. I'm not sure what time it was. It was dark. I don't wear a watch. I had a story to write for the Tribune, but was told it was okay, that Tuesday would do. It was a story about the internet. I went back to Jules' house at about 11 a.m. End quote. That admission now placed Bailey outside of the house for a significant stretch, during the exact window of time Sophie was murdered. Despite all this, both Bailey and Jules were released shortly after. But the aftermath was chaotic. Jules would later claim that what Gardaí recorded in her signed statements was not what she had actually said. Still, when the couple reunited, she seemed relieved. She told Bailey she'd been informed he had confessed. Meanwhile, the media frenzy had fully erupted. Bailey's name was now public and journalists swarmed the prairie. He said he felt hounded. Senan Maloney even dropped a note at the house asking to speak with him for an exclusive with the Star. Bailey, feeling overwhelmed and isolated, said he trusted them. He agreed to speak with them. It would prove to be a major mistake. That evening, at around 7 p.m, journalists Senan Maloney and Jimmy Guerin arrived at the prairie to meet with Ian Bailey. They sat with him in the kitchen, where Bailey began detailing what he claimed was a deeply abusive experience in Garda custody. He told them his interrogation had been filled with threats, intimidation and insults. On the drive to Banda Garda station, he said, officers had stopped the car in a remote area where they allegedly shoved him, screamed at him and even showed him a bullet, telling him he'd end up face down in a ditch with one in the back of his head. He said they called him a fucking English bastard and jabbed him repeatedly in the side. At the station, he claimed he was stripped and laughed at, but Maloney didn't buy it. He found the story hard to believe, especially in such a high-profile case where any misconduct could compromise the entire investigation. If it had happened at all, Maloney thought, it would have made more sense on the return trip, not on the way to the station. Still, he pressed Bailey on other key details, especially the sighting at Keelfata Bridge. Bailey insisted it was untrue. He again claimed his injuries came from cutting down Christmas trees. Maloney challenged him on this. Who cuts Christmas trees 2 days before Christmas? Bailey opened his mouth several times but couldn't answer. He stayed silent. Eventually he muttered, "They've got nothing on me." Later, Bailey would change his story, saying the scratches came from killing turkeys, but in this interview, he never mentioned turkeys at all. As the journalists were leaving, they briefly saw Jules. Jimmy pointed something out to Senan that he hadn't noticed. Jules had a black eye. Jimmy would later include that detail in a statement to Gardaí. Both reporters left that evening convinced of one thing. They believed Ian Bailey had killed Sophie Toscan du Plantier. And when Bailey's claims of Garda abuse were made public, the arresting officers flatly denied everything. Around this time, Paris Match sent journalist Caroline Manguez to Ireland to report on the case. She had been in contact with Ian Bailey previously and met him in person at the prairie. From the start, Caroline found Bailey unsettling. He began the meeting by showering her with compliments, telling her she was a very special person, that everyone was impressed by her. It felt inappropriate. She became increasingly uncomfortable, especially when she noticed a hatchet by the door. Throughout the visit, Jules appeared briefly in the kitchen, but every time she entered, Bailey would tell her to go away. He launched into a tirade about the Gardaí, claiming they had no right to take a blood sample from him since he hadn't been charged. He went further, suggesting the Gardaí were planning to plant his blood at the crime scene, specifically on Sophie's door. That raised a troubling question. How did Bailey know about the blood on the door, and why would he assume it was his? He insisted the Gardaí were manufacturing evidence and said Joe's daughter Ginny was lying about him. He claimed people in the area disliked him and could therefore say anything without consequence, and he complained that if he were ever charged, the trial would be inherently unfair because of the media coverage, a statement that made Caroline wonder if this was why Bailey constantly sought out the spotlight. He also claimed to have intuition that material would be found under Sophie's fingernails. At one point, he told Caroline he had seen Sophie during a previous trip to Cork through a window working on a laptop. But later, when Caroline visited Sophie's house, she realised that from where Bailey claimed to have seen her, you couldn't possibly see into the kitchen, unless you were standing right outside. Then things took an even stranger turn. Bailey started speaking about his great powers and energy. He said he would sometimes dance in the light in his underwear. He claimed one of Jules' daughters believed he had a dark energy and wanted to break up his relationship with Jules. Then disturbingly, he described an incident involving Ginny, Jules' 19-year-old daughter, saying she had come to him wearing only a black bra and was, in his words, exhibiting her tits. Caroline was shocked. Jules and photographer Coleman were present at the time. Caroline said Bailey later asked her to sleep over, telling her he'd prepared a room for her in the house. She refused. How creepy. Jules, meanwhile, told Caroline she couldn't bear being separated from Ian for more than a few days. Again, what does that scream to you? Abuse, control, manipulation. She said they shared a deep, powerful connection. Caroline couldn't help but wonder if that was a sign of emotional dependency or something more troubling. Meanwhile, forensic results revealed that the blood found on Sophie's door was hers, not Bailey's. And inside the house, no fingerprints were found that indicated anyone else had been there. But one small detail stood out. When housekeeper Josie Helen walked through the property, she noticed one thing missing: a small red hatchet that was usually kept near the back door. Could Sophie have grabbed it to defend herself during the attack? And if so, where did it end up? Okay, so I decided there about halfway through that I am actually going to make this 2 episodes because it is very long. I hope that you are enjoying the story so far. I tried so hard to there's so much information and I try to put it in such a clear, concise way and try to timeline it well. There's a lot of confusion in it with a lot of hearsay and this person saw him there, this person did that, this person said that. So yeah, I think 2 episodes might be more beneficial, and I will hopefully have that out for you very soon. And yeah, so I once again thank you guys for listening. Again, please rate the show. It's really important to me if you can rate the show. If you can share it with your friends, tell them about me, I would love that. And just anytime you want to hit me up online. I know I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, but my podcast Instagram page, not my personal one but my actual Instagram page, I never use it. It's so difficult to run 2 Instagram accounts. I don't know how people do it. Some people have several on the go between their businesses or personal ones, whatever, Finsta, blah blah blah. I just never update it, which is so bad. So I just do my podcast on my main show. I know I really should have my own separate one for it that I actually run, but it just, and then I forget which one I'm logged into, and I ended up putting it in the wrong page. Oh, I just can't. It's too much work for me. Oh my god, my time management, I really need to get better at it, but also I really don't have time to do anything. So anyways, I'm gonna let this off here, and once again, if you need any help, contact the hotline.org, and you can contact me directly if you want to chat or anything. Let me know in the DMs on Instagram at mangogs. My email for the podcast is ipvandmepodcast@gmail.com. Again, these are all in the show notes as per usual. And hope you guys have a lovely day wherever you are listening to this. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you all. And yeah, have a good one.